Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. As we just discussed, for the people who arrived early in pretty hot Amsterdam, it will be even warmer later this week. Our last webinar before, the summer break. We're not really taking a break. We're busy implementing new features of our scheduling tool. So we have quite some things on our to-do list. But for the webinars, we're taking a break. So we'll be back in September. But during this last webinar, I'm going to tell you certain things about Erlang. What's new in Erlang, as you can see in the title, low volume queues, but it's more than that. So I'll introduce you to that. And in the meantime, I hope I'll introduce give you some more background information about Erlang. So it's not just about new features, but also some important things we try to implement. By the way, I didn't introduce myself. I know many of you, but my name's Ger Koole. Actually, Erlang was the first project that Auke and I implemented a little over 20 years ago when we started CCmath. So as a project, it is close to my heart. But of course, in the meantime, in these last 20 plus years, we did many more things. But again, Erlang is still something I like to talk about. So here we go. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. That's perhaps the easiest. And at the end of the webinar, and if there's anything urgent, Jesper is also watching the chat. We'll answer them right away. But please put them in the chat. That's the easiest. Okay, let's get started. So what's new? But the first question is, why a new version? Wasn't it perfect yet? You've been using Erlang for so long. So what's the improvement? Well, a couple of things. Two things, basically. There's certain things we thought we could make things a bit easier, also on the web version of it. So that's one thing. And on the other hand, there was some room for improvement. And as the title said, it has to do with, especially for low volumes, but we'll come to that. But let's first, the first improvement that we did was for a long time, we had the desire to improve the web version. So actually, the web version is for quite a number of people, perhaps the first contact with Erlang. We often hear, hey, it's clear that you know a lot about it, but if you're not that familiar with all these technicalities, the learning curve might be really steep. So what we did is we improved this web version. And I'm not going to demo that to you. You can go to our website, try it out yourself. But the main improvements is that there's a button to help you choose which calculator, why you would choose Erlang C or X or blending. So this helps you in choosing. Yeah, so that's perhaps you already know a difference between Erlang C and Erlang X, but if you don't, then you know. Furthermore, we try to make then there are these different scenarios. Do you start? Do you do what we sometimes call the forward calculation? You know your staffing level. You want to know the service level. That is one scenario. And then the backward calculation. Okay, I want this service level, or I have this average speed of answer. How many agents do I need? Yes, that's another way of that's what you might call the backward calculation. And what Erlang basically does, it tries different values and then it tries to find the one where you exactly hit, let's say, the 80%. Yes. So this was not always clear. This was in our previous version. I guess this interface was not so user friendly. So now we have these different scenarios where it says, you know, your staffing and you want to know your service level, and the other performance indicators, and the other ones. There are scenarios, you can click on them. So these here are the parameters that you need in all situations. And here are the ones which are specific for a scenario. You press calculate and you get the results here. And also, if you change something, you get like a red message saying, hey, you should, your results are not yet updated. So it's in multiple ways, it's more user-friendly. Now, one of the ways, and I think now it's getting a bit more, so this is really making the user phase easier, especially for people less familiar with this, like for whom this might be a first encounter to Erlang and other versions of Erlang than Erlang C. One of the things is that Erlang is used for different reasons. So here you can see you have a forecast per minute, yes, but you can also go to quarter or half hour. Often your forecast, you know it per quarter. If you're using the Excel version, then of course you have to do a calculation behind that. But here in the web version, you can enter here if you want to do it per minute, per quarter, per half hour. Your forecast is probably at the quarter level. Yes, then you can do that. So that is typically for short-term scheduling. You want to know, it's here in Amsterdam, it's 4:07. So you want to know how many agents should I schedule? Well, tomorrow at 4, for example. Yes. Okay. To know that and to adjust your staffing, you need to use Erlang at the interval level. However, Erlang, and perhaps you do not even do that because you have some scheduling tooling from us or one of the other vendors that does that for you. Yes. However, it might also be, and many people use Erlang for capacity planning, yes, for long-term planning. Then it's not about how many agents do I need tomorrow at 4 o'clock, but how many agents do I need in week 40 next year? Yes. So then you're aggregating at the daily level or at the weekly level. Yes. So, and then of course, if you want to do the Erlang calculation in the right way, you need to know I have some issues with my mouse. Here it is. Then you need to the opening hours per day or per week. Yeah, so that is an additional option really to make the usage of it a bit easier. Yes. And how does this calculation work? And here it gets a little bit more technical. So for those of you who are interested in more of the technical details, and I know and for a number of you, that's definitely the case. Let's dive a bit deeper into that. So this is not really, so this is something that we now actively support in our new Erlang version. But let's dive a bit deeper into this. And this is something, well, we used to call it Ronald's trick because a consultant we're cooperating with, Ronald Baars, he showed this to me for the first time, and I was really surprised. However, with all our algorithms and things we do, we're not used to using the names, but we try to find nice names. And I thought, hey, what is a nice name for that? Let's call it the Erlang law of averages. And that is actually inspired by something that is called not the law of averages, but the flaw of averages. And actually, there's a book about it. And with my students at university, as you might know, I also work at a university. And sometimes ask students also to read this book. This is not super mathematical, but it introduces interesting concepts about averages to a broader audience. So this is definitely, I think it's out of print, but you might find second-hand copies of this book. It's called The Flaw of Averages. And it basically says that you should not mistake distributions with averages. And the example that's often used, that's a drawing from the book. Here it says the average depth of this river is 3 feet, and this person is trying to cross the river, but most of it is very shallow, and then there's one steep part of it. Yeah? So the average here doesn't say anything. It's about what is. It's also about the variability of the depth. And to make it perhaps more closer to home, and we'll get to call centers, but suppose that you have a project. We do IT projects. And then suppose that you have 10 activities that on average all take 1 week. That doesn't mean that your project is ready on average, as you do multiple of these projects, one after each other, after 1 week. No. So the average length of a project is different from the average length of the activities. Yes, you should take the average after the project, because actually a project is finished when all the activities are finished. And if the activities each have an average of 1 week, well, only one activity, then there are multiple which take more than 1 week, and they determine, of course, the final length of the project, because all activities should be finished. Yeah, so you shouldn't mistake. So here, what you do is you take the average, the longest activity. You take an average, and you shouldn't exchange the maximization and the average. Yeah, and that's an error that many people that sometimes unconsciously you easily do, and one of the reasons why many projects are late. So if you apply that to call centers, well, it holds, yeah, and it's not a theorem. It doesn't hold for 100%, but it holds for 99% or 98%. Yes. So translated to call centers, yes, and that's what I'd like to call this Erlang law of averages, is that the average required staffing. Yeah? So you have a day or a week. You're interested. Of course, volume at one moment is lower than at another moment. So at one moment, you need 10 agents. The other moment, you need 30 agents. So we're interested in the average, 20 agents, multiplied by the opening hours gives you the number of hours. Yes. And that is almost equal in most situations. Again, it's a law, it's not a theorem. Almost equal to the required staffing of the average interval. That makes life a lot easier, because then you say, what is my average volume? You use Erlang, you multiply it again by your opening hours, and you have the required hours during your day or week. Yeah. Now, why does it hold? Well, yeah, and then it gets a bit technical. That's because the Erlang formula is almost linear. And let me explain this to you. Yes, so what I did here, by the way, all my calculations are done in R, which is a statistical tool, and connected to, of course, our Erlang engine, which is somewhere running in the clouds. And then I do calculations, and we have this piece of software that connects to our engine in the cloud. So what you see here, super simple example. What I did, I used forecast per minute. Yes, that's actually in terms of Erlang. If you want to know more about standard Erlang calculation, we have more webinars on that. So if you say, hey, this doesn't ring a bell, and you might want to look at some earlier webinars which are on our website. But here you have a volume of 5 calls per minute, here 7.5, here 10 per minute. And perhaps these are, I could take all the intervals of a day. These are to show you this linearity, the 2 intervals of a day. Yes. So this here is the average interval, 7.5 calls per minute. Yes. So one interval is 5, the other is 10. The average is 7.5. So here I included the required number of agents for this forecast of 7.5. Yes. So this is first taking the average and then using in Erlang. And this here, if I take this blue line, yes, the average between the required staffing from a forecast of 5 and 10 is just below this red dot, is here. Yeah? That's the average required staffing. Yeah? And the difference here, and the number of agents, I just filled in some numbers. So that is on average around 35 agents, it's only 0.1 agent. Yeah, so this shows that in this situation, and we tried it out in many different situations, this works. So if you do capacity planning, instead of doing things interval by interval, it's very precise to take the average volume and use, let's say, the average interval to calculate your average staffing, and then you multiply again with the opening hours, and then you know the amount of hours that is required. And then, of course, you have to do at your shrinkage, etc., etc., etc. Yes. Okay. Of course, if at the day of execution you want that the outcomes are as required, you should make sure that you schedule the agents at the right interval. You can do the capacity planning and then say, hey, I need on average 35 agents. But if in this interval you schedule 30 agents and here you schedule 40 agents, then things go wrong. Yeah? So you should, if you want the outcomes of the capacity planning to be right, and when you're executing it, then of course you should make sure and that you schedule them in the right interval. And that already hints when it doesn't hold. Yes. So what I did here, I fixed. I do the other. I go the other way. So on the previous slide you saw backward calculation. Yeah? I said how many agents do I need to reach a certain service level. Now I'm doing the other thing. I'm changing my workforce for a fixed forecast and average handling time, but I'm changing the staffing. Yeah. So here, when I schedule 15 agents, again, it's a bit exaggerated, but when I schedule 15 agents, I get a really low service level, 15% or somewhere around that. And when I schedule 25 agents, I get a 90% service level. Yes. On purpose, I exaggerated it a bit to get clear outcomes. Yes. So here I'm understaffed. Here I'm overstaffed. Yes. If I schedule 20 agents, I get around 60%. And indeed, now there is a significant difference. Yes. So if you do the staff, if you're well balanced, yes, if you schedule at the right moment, it works also in the other way. But if you're under and overstaffed, if you're mixing that a bit, then this Erlang law of averages does not hold. Yeah, so you should use it with care. But if you do capacity calculations and you want to know the amount of, if you know upfront actually that. And you might have moments where you're really understaffed and overstaffed because with your shift, you cannot follow the demand pattern. Yes, then you know that you should be careful because the eventual outcomes are, then you cannot take averages. Yeah? How can then you still use this Erlang law of averages to avoid that you have to do your Erlang calculations really per interval? Well, here, your service level, yes, if you're sometimes understaffed and sometimes overstaffed, there's a question. I will answer this question at the end, Gaetano. If this, if you say, hey, I know that I'm sometimes understaffed, I know that I'm sometimes overstaffed, so I know that my service level is not as good as perhaps this Erlang law of averages predicts, because I'm not scheduling my agents exactly at the right moment. Yes? If you know that, then you can introduce a factor that works like a shrinkage factor. You can, and this actually see as a bit of shrinkage. Because here, when you schedule 25 agents, perhaps you need only 20 or 22. So some of the agents are idle. So that is, in a way, you can see that as perhaps as a form of shrinkage. We sometimes call it also a model factor. But and you can say, okay, actually here there's some idleness here, and I introduce an additional idleness parameter or shrinkage factor to account for this. Yes, and of course that assumes that from there that your days are comparable. If and that if one day there is a lot of under and overstaffing, and the next day it's all well equalized, that of course would make this model factor depend on the day, complicated things. Yes? Okay, I hope that's clear. And again, if you want to hear it back or have another look at it or give it another thought, well, you can, I would say, try it out, do it yourself, and that's the best way of learning. And again, things will, I will put the webinar online by the end of this week or later next week. So why did I tell you all this? Well, as I said, on one hand, we try to, especially for the web version, if you're using the Excel version or the Python R version, you have to divide by the opening hours to go to the average interval. You have to do some multiplication, but I hope that is all, that you're familiar that. By the way, we're busy developing a capacity planning tool where this is all, of course, part of the functionality. Well, one of the things is that it might well be that the outcome is a fractional number. Yes, that the outcome is, on average, you need 20.5 agents. Yeah. And that's, and why 20.5? Well, for 20, you're understaffed. For 21, you're overstaffed. And and if you multiply by the opening hours, you still end up with the integer number. So there's no reason to go for the 21. So, and if you're familiar with Erlang, that's perhaps not the point that necessary to make, but one of the things we found out already a long time ago is that it doesn't suffice for Erlang just to give integer, to work with integer agent numbers. You also want to work with non-integer agent numbers. So capacity planning is a reason. On average, you want, well, 20.5 agents, and on one interval it's 20, another it's 21, or 15 and 25, etc., etc. Also, when you add shrinkage, usually you have your net workloads. You apply Erlang to get to your gross workload, which is the net workforce, and then you add your shrinkage components. So, and then perhaps you're rounding. Yes, and if you already round in the Erlang phase, if you only have integer outcomes, then you're probably rounding up twice, adding inefficiency twice. So there are good reasons, and there might even be other reasons. Let's not go into details right now, but there might be other reasons. So you might want to interpolate, yes? And how can you do that? Well, an obvious way to do that, and that's how we started in earlier versions of our Erlang module, we started with a linear interpolation. Yeah, so the red dots are, let's say, the standard Erlang calculation. Yeah, and for Erlang C, that is really, you can find it everywhere. And this is typically, by the way, this graph is typically Erlang X. If you have Erlang C, then it typically Bob goes down to 0. This is typically Erlang C. So here I changed the number of agents for a load of 4 Erlang. So the forecast time per minute times the average handling time in minutes is 4. Yes. So here the system gets flips from Erlang C would flip from stable to unstable. So Erlang C would typically have a service level 0, and then WAP go up here pretty straight, and then go in this concave manner, flatten towards the 100% or the service level of 1. 100%. Erlang X typically has this behavior, more like what is it, an S shape, the current S shape. So here you see a linear interpolation. So between every red dot, which is standard Erlang, there's a straight line. So the disadvantage is that it kind of turns that at every integer number, it's not smooth. But there, and you might think, okay, is there another way to interpolate? Well, there's no, and behind interpolation, there's not really an intuition. What does it mean to have 15 and a half agents? Does it mean that all agents take, let's say, around 1 minute of a break? All 16 agents take take a minute of break? Or is it that, or half a minute? Or is it that one agent enters the, gets, enters, becomes available for taking calls halfway during the interval? So there are different types of interpretation, but none of them can be really translated into Erlang. So it's not upfront clear how you should interpolate. But that you can get weird results, that's true. And let me focus on that. And that is especially the case if you have a very low load. And in discussions with some of our customers, 1.5 years ago, it became apparent that this was really important, and that started us also experimenting with different versions to do this interpolation. So here there's a super low load. And here you see the service level for changing number of agents. Of course, when you have no agents at all, service level is 0. And then already if you have one agent, it almost goes to 100%. And that's typically the case if you have a very low load. Now, suppose that you're interested in scheduling how many agents should I need to get an 80% service level. And so what you do is you have an 80% service level, and you look, where does the green line, where does it get to 80%? And so, because this is almost at 100%, you always get 0.8. Yeah? So an 80% service level requirement for a very low load requires 0.8 agents, which is not really logical. Yeah? So what we did, and I cannot, one reason is that we don't, that this is, well, this is our secret to how we did this, but also it would involve a lot of mathematics to go into the details. But over the last month, we implemented this, and to get all these particular cases, low volume, high time to answer, etc., to get it all working was actually quite a lot of work. Yes, because you shouldn't have the case that we have a customer entering for 1,000 different volumes, trying to get Erlang, and then there's some error message for one of them. It should work for all possible volumes. So we tested this also extensively. And let me also take the space to thank our scientists and engineers who did this. This was quite a lot of work next to all the other things we're doing. But so what we did was a smoother implementation. And let me show you exactly for this case what it is. So actually the blue line is this situation, and the green line is well, actually 2 versions back. I'm not showing you the intermediate solution we had, but the blue line is the current solution. And it kind of made us redo all the calculations we did before. So the logic behind Erlang, it gives exactly the same results for integer numbers, but the calculation method is really different. Yeah. So for higher volumes, it doesn't make a difference. If you think, okay, I switch to version 4 and it changes everything, probably it doesn't, because here you see what it does. In the other case I showed with the load of 4, where you expect, well, where you probably need to have 6 agents scheduled. So you see 6 isn't that much, But as you can see, the differences here are small, but it's well, especially for these low volumes that it makes a difference. So that was for us the reason to do this. Okay, let's stop with talking about smoothing. About with this interpolation and making this a smooth line. I hope my point is clear. Again, it doesn't apply to many customers, but we do want to have a solution that works in all situations. And perhaps you say, even if I have a low volume, I always need two agents. I cannot have one agent in my call center. So perhaps that's not an issue. But for some it was. And so that's why we solved this. Further improvements. Well, actually, as I said, we had to, of course, do this, make sure that this new method works, calculation method works for all different numbers that you can get. So we generated thousands of random inputs and then just checked if it gave sensible output. And we did some automated and a large-scale automated checking for that. Actually, for a blending calculator, this was especially challenging. And I do want to make, and that's then the fourth improvement, we also made some additional changes to the blending calculator. So this is the new version of the blending calculator. So this is typically used when you have inbound, and next to that you have a channel that is not or less time constrained, such as email. But if an agent is handling an email, you don't want to interrupt the agent because there's an inbound call that urgently need to be answered. Now, in this situation, you do not want to, if agents are idle, if there is no inbound call, you do not want to push emails to all your 3 agents because that might lead to long waiting times on the inbound channel. So the solution is to have a threshold level. I don't have an example here. We also have webinars on this. But the solution is to try to keep always a few agents available for inbound. And when the number of idle agents exceeds a certain threshold, then you start sending emails to the longest idle agents. I think, and I know about quite a number of call centers that work in such a mode. So I think this blending calculator is actually, quite useful. However, on the statistics of our website, we see that not many people consult this calculator. Okay? So I want to, do a bit of advertisement for this blending calculator. So it's little use, but I actually think it's quite useful. And what we did as a fourth improvement is, of course, we changed the layout of the calculator, but we also added some more scenarios, some more ways to use it. For example, and one of the reasons why we did this is we had a customer who wanted to use this calculator and in a more extensive, in different ways. And one of the ways they wants to use it is, you have a service level constraint for your inbound, makes sense, but also you want to do a certain number of, as we call it here, outbound calls or emails. You can use it for both. When you're talking about outbound calls, it's clear that you cannot interrupt them. So then you want to have a certain output on your outbound, and then it tells you in this situation, this is actually not a scenario here, but it would tell you how many agents you need and how you should set this threshold level. So that is a fourth improvement. I think it's worthwhile, if you have never looked at it, to have a look at this blending calculator. Because the whole idea of it, if you're doing blending in the right way, it increases your occupancy, it makes you more flexible, you need less real-time management. So I think this is advantageous in many ways. Um, so these are the main improvements. I have here a list of further improvements. Um, as I said, on one hand, we improved some of the, especially this interpolation. But one of the things we want to do is also make the usage easier. One of the things we did, and I will talk on the next slide about if you want to switch to version 4, what you should need to change. But one of the things we did is removed the lines parameter. And if you're a user of the Erlang module, you might know that there is a lines parameter. And that might be confusing because most people set this lines parameter to 1,000, not to be bothered by it. But if you set it too low, then next to abandonments, you get also blocking because all the lines are occupied. Now, 20 years ago, that might have still been an issue with old-fashioned telephony where you were restricted by the number of lines. But nowadays, with IP telephony, nobody is bothered by this. Nobody, well, hardly anybody is using this. So that's why we skipped this lines parameter. We are still busy with that, but we are busy updating the manual to make things easier, adding some nice videos and making the not just the website, but also the manual clearer. Yeah, lines, you can see them as the trunks. Exactly. Yeah. And what we used to call trunks. Yeah. There was a bug in the Python version, and some of our customers. So what you can do in and what you typically do in Python and R is that in one call you use the Erlang for, let's say, all quarters of a whole day. If you are 24 hours open, that would mean 96 calls in one go, all quarters of the day. But we had some customers who wanted to do it with multiple thousands of intervals. And then there was a problem. So they had to split it up in chunks of 1,000. Yeah, okay, that requires a little bit of programming. That's not necessary anymore. Also, what we did is we changed the authentication that used to be based on the IP address. But if you use some online service, if you're using, or I did actually some experiments with Google Docs, and we do not have a version yet for Google Docs, but actually that is something that's not so hard to make, and I actually made a version for myself. But Google Docs uses a range of IP addresses, so then you get you have to authenticate for all these IP addresses. Yeah, so the authentication is now based on the user ID and not anymore mostly. It used to be mostly you had to associate your IP address with your user ID, and then you were ready. And that we had to change because some of the tooling, if you use some online tooling for Python, some web-based version, this things like Amazon Web Services and for example Google Docs, they use ranges of IP addresses. So we had to change this. So a technical issue, but important for the online version. Okay, I would have loved to show 10 improvements. Perhaps I forgot one of them. In that case, if any of the CCmath people is here, let me know. But these were the improvements we made for this new version. Took us quite some time to get the technical things working, but I'm happy this worked out. So, well, I don't know if there will be a version 5, but for me, this feels like the definitive version. Although I have the ambition, I'm thinking about sometimes, well, dreaming about Erlang and multi-skill. We have methods for that, and perhaps making that also public as part of this package. But that's perhaps for a later webinar next year or something. Well, shouldn't stop dreaming, but I think when it comes to Erlang X, Erlang C blending, this really feels like the definitive version. If you want to switch to version 4, perhaps you're already using our Erlang tooling. Well, if you use the website, there's no choice. It now uses version 4. So you might see, again, especially if you try it out for very low volumes, some small differences. For regular volumes, that is a number of digits behind the decimal point. Probably you won't notice it. In case you're using, we have a version that is working on Office 365. Yes, that works through the, there is a online store for Excel. And we have issues with that version. Also, it's difficult to put multiple versions in the Excel store. So for now, there is no, we do not plan to upgrade to version 4. If you're using it, you can continue using it, but it will stay on the current on version 3. Yeah, and actually we closed it down so that no more new customers can use this. Yeah, the way to go if you're using Excel is to use the enterprise, the offline version, which really means that the add-in is installed locally on your machine or on your own network, which also means lower latency. Sometimes there are some issues with installing it because of firewalls, etc. That also holds, by the way, for this Erlang, this Office 365 store. But we actually always find a workaround to get it working. Version 4 is available. Yeah, so if you would take a trial, you can download it there. Yes. If you are already using it and you want to move to version 4, you can manually upgrade. That's for free. But because of this lines parameter, you need to make a small change in your Excel sheets. So be aware of that. So be careful with that not to keep everything going. It is a relatively small change for the calculations I just showed you. I did it myself. I made some small changes to my R code and did it myself. And of course, in Excel, it's just changing the Excel command a bit. But be aware of that you're not surprised that you upgrade and all of a sudden you get an error message. That because there is now, then you have an unknown parameter. In case you have Python or R, also all new customers will receive version 4. Again, existing customers can manually upgrade, and some small changes in your code is required. Actually, we're still busy doing that. As I said, I did it myself, and that will somewhere in the next weeks that will be available. To round up, if you're interested in trying version 4, again, you can download it from our website. You have here the links right away, or you can go to our website and you'll find under software products, you'll find Erlang. If you say, hey, I want to know more about Erlang and I want to deepen my knowledge, please go to one of our trainings. We have trainings, of course, on Erlang, but on basically on all WFM-related subjects, from forecasting to staffing, which is, of course, Erlang is an important part of that, but also about multi-channel blending, scheduling, intraday management. We have e-learnings. We do online face-to-face trainings. We also do in-person trainings, both in Amsterdam or if you have a larger group at your location. I'm somewhere next month traveling to to Belgium for a training. But nowadays, we also do a lot of trainings online, which allows you to do a training for, let's say, 4 days, 1 day a week. So if you're interested, go to our website, ask Jesper, or send us an email, and we're all happy to discuss our possibilities. The schedule of scheduled training is on our website. And finally, in the end, all our knowledge goes into our software tooling. Today, I talked about Erlang, which is actually a small tool of a bigger set of WFN tools, from forecasting to scheduling to real-time to adherence. So if you want to know more of our tooling or you have perhaps challenges you want to discuss with us, we are very happy to have a chat and talk about your challenges or give a demo about our software tooling. And again, you can contact me or Jesper or go directly to our website and schedule a demo. That's it for today. Thanks a lot for your attention. Let me thank again the engineers of CCmath who did this. We had lots of discussions, but in the end, it's our science team who implements all this, who makes all this possible. So I enjoy always working with them, and that's super to have such a team and do make this beautiful software. So I'm very happy with that. So thanks again for your attention. See you at our next webinar after the summer break. And again, hope to see you then and have a nice summer. Thank you for your remarks. I don't know if you have any questions. I see one question by Gaetano. Find the approach interesting and logical. Is it already part of our model? Yes, actually, we have something we call a model factor in CC Forecast, where you can add this, let's say this 5% that I mentioned. Of course, this depends on your own situation, whether that's 5% or 10% or 2%. But yes, we do have that. I have to say it is not that often used. And as I said, we're working on a capacity planning tool, and there it is, of course, a crucial component of it. Yes. Okay, I see no more questions. Again, thanks for your attention. Thanks for the nice work, nice words. Again, have a great summer. And hope to see you again at our next webinar or at some other occasion. Thanks, and bye-bye.